Black Dahlia Files, welcome. Just getting things set up here. Okay. I'll give people one more minute to show up, and we'll see how it goes. It's Andre. Hello, Andre. Eugene, welcome. Good to see you. And over on Instagram, I have Black Dahlia Files, so that's good. Okay, I'm gonna give people one more minute to show up, just in case. Somebody let me know my audio is working, because I had a problem with that early on. Vince, thank you. Okay, great. All right, it's 10:01. This is the Ask Me Anything on George Hodel for October 2023. I'm Larry Harnisch, and this is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. These are books by Steve Hodel. They are very bad. If you read them, you'll have to unlearn everything, and maybe your head will explode. Okay. How did we get to this point? Okay. I started doing a couple of months ago, I started doing an Ask Me Anything on the Black Dahlia case. I started doing that because I was so unhappy with the true crime podcasts and TV shows. I don't do interviews anymore on the Black Dahlia case. It is just, true crime has just gotten to be a mess. So this is my replacement. And I got so many George Hodel questions that it's like, you know what? I'm going to split the George Hodel stuff off and do that separately. So this is only George Hodel questions. Black Dahlia questions will be the first Tuesday in November. And before we get started, very important, if you take one thing away, it's this: don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. Don't. Whatever you're trying to do, you're not accomplishing that. You know, it's just like, don't do that. Okay. Now for Steve Hodel. Steve Hodel likes to claim that his father was Dr. George Hodel, was a jet set serial killer, evil genius, criminal mastermind, and all around bad guy. Maybe you read his books or seen him on TV or heard him interviewed on podcasts, and you're wondering if anything is true. Well, that's what we're going to look at today. And I covered this before. I have been fact-checking Steve Hodel for 20 years, since Black Dahlia Avenger came out in 2003. And I can tell you that he lies. He lies all the time. He lies about everything. But it isn't just enough to say, oh, well, Steve Hodel lies, because, yeah, he does. He has 4 techniques for lying. And what are they? They are inflation, where he blows something up; distortion, where he blows it up, but also takes it in a completely different direction; suppression, where he doesn't tell you the entire story; and just flat out fiction. Okay. We're going to see examples of all of that today with the trial of George Hodel. How does he get away with it? How does Steve Hodel get away with lying so much? Ignorance. It is simple ignorance. Steve knows that the average person hasn't a clue about law enforcement, doesn't know how the police department works, doesn't know how the court system works. We'll see a lot of that today. How the jury system works, how grand juries work. He relies on people knowing nothing about the medical profession or the art world. He knows folks are generally ignorant, and he absolutely depends on their ignorance. So that's what I'm trying to address today, is give you some knowledge on that. Okay, who am I? Who am I to question the great detective? Detective 3, Steve Hodel, with a zillion solves. Okay, 34 years in journalism, 27 at the Los Angeles Times. I am the chronic naysayer and sour grapes guy who can't get over being surpassed by the great detective solving the Black Dahlia case. And I'll tell you now, Steve never attacks what I say. He always attacks me personally. Okay, this time I'm going to cover the trial of George Hodel. This is a complicated story. There are a lot of names. There are a lot of details that are going to come flying out. I will do my best to organize it. My notes run 15 pages. Okay. So I'm not going to sit here and read my notes. I am going to refer to them, going to try to remember everything. It's a lot. I may have to backtrack and say, oh, wait, I forgot to say this important thing. Again, there are, this would be a complicated story, even if Steve Hodel had not been lying about it for all this time. Okay, so let's meet some of the characters in the trial of George Hodel. Well, first of all, there's George. Okay. And then there is his oldest son, Duncan. Okay. Who is Duncan Hodel? Duncan will be important later. Duncan is from marriage number one. Okay. That's Duncan. Then we have Dorothy number one. Who is that? That is Dorothy Anthony Barb or Barbie. She was from a relationship with George Hodel. I'm not sure they ever got married. But Dorothy number one is the mother of Tamar, who is one of the main figures in the trial of George Hodel. Then we have Tamar. Okay, Tamar is born in 1935. When you look at her birth certificate, as I have, you'll see that there's no father listed. Okay. We don't know who the dad is, at least according to the birth certificate. Probably George. George certainly acted, well, I mean, that's another question whether George Hodel ever acted like a father. That's a whole different thing. But anyway, George may well have been the dad. But according to the birth certificate, there's no dad. The mom is listed as an artist's model. Okay, that is Dorothy Anthony Barbie. Okay. Also, we have another Dorothy, Dorothy number two. That's Steve Hodel's mom. She is the former Dorothy Harvey Houston. She's the ex-wife of John Huston, who at that time, when they were married, was a nobody. He had yet to do Maltese Falcon. He was just Walter Huston. At this point, he was just Walter Huston's son. He was not known as an actor or director or anything. That all came later. Okay. You got Dorothy one, and now Dorothy number two is married to George Hodel, yes. And they have three boys. They have Michael, Steve's older brother. You might remember him. He was a radio broadcaster. Then you have Steve. You have Steve's twin brother who died in infancy. And then you have Kelvin. Steve's born in 41. Kelvin's born in 42. Okay, that is all of the Hodel clan. Let's see. And there are going to be, we're going to encounter judges and attorneys and a lot of other people. I should mention a couple of folks who are associated with the Sowden house where George Hodel was living when the alleged incident occurred in 1949. That would be Joe Barrett. There's also a George Hodel associate, Fred Sexton, who was an artist. The newspaper accounts describe him as a painter. There's also a woman named Barbara Sherman, and she seems to have had some sort of romantic attachment to George Hodel because she had, this will come out trial, she used to spend the night with George. And there's another woman named Corinne Tarrin. Okay, you got all these names straight? We're just getting started. Okay, so we're going to start in 1935. George is in medical school. And there is Dorothy number one. She is an artist's model. And in 1935, Tamar is born. And there's no father listed on the birth certificate. Tamar is born in 1935. She died of cancer in 2015. So George is in medical school. And Dorothy number one will later get married to a guy named Charles Barb or Barbie. He's a radio broadcaster, a kind of musician. He was held prisoner by the Germans during World War II. They were apparently not married real long. But that's who that is. Hey, Ashley. Um, so that is her situation. They got married in 1947. Um, okay. So that brings us up to 1948. Now, during this time, when Tamar is born, um, her mother, Dorothy number one, is a single mom. And so Tamar is, this will come out in the trial, Tamar uh, is raised primarily by her grandmother. So her grandmother will also testify in the trial. You've got the mom and the grandmother. Anyway, so this is what is what is okay. That's kind of the prelude for Tamar. Now, where is George during all this time? No, let me back up. Okay. Um, let's take a look now at what Steve says. If you've listened to Steve, if you listen to the podcast and the interviews, what he will say is this. Yeah, my dad was in medical school, which is true. He went to be a public health officer in New Mexico. That is also true. Steve will inflate that and say, and also Arizona. That's not true. But George Hodel was in a public health officer in New Mexico. He comes back to Los Angeles, and George connects with Dorothy number two. They get married. They have three boys, Michael, Steve, and Kelvin. And the way Steve tells it is, yeah, my folks came back to LA, or my dad came back to LA, and he marries my mother, and he buys the Stoughton house in 1945. And dad is the king, mom is the queen, and we are the three princes. And this is virtually a quote from his podcast. God knows I've listened to enough of Steve's podcast now. He'll say, yep, dad was the king, mom was the queen, we were the three princes, and everything was going swimmingly until there, and he'll do bong, 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 knock on the door, and it's the police, and he will say, well, Tamar came down to spend the summer with us. Okay. None of that's true. Everything I just said, none of that's true. Okay. What actually happened? George Hodel graduates from medical school. Fine. He is never a surgeon at a logging camp. Steve's made that up. That's total fiction. George Hodel is a public health officer in New Mexico. He focuses on communicable diseases, venereal disease, rabies, that kind of, I think maybe tuberculosis. I'm relying on my memory, but anyway, communicable disease, that's what he does. And venereal disease is his thing. And so he does come back to Los Angeles. He does get a job with the LA County Health Department. Yes, that much of it is true. But, and this is where we go like that. George Hodel quits the health department in 1944. What? Yeah, he quits the health department. But Steve says there's all these headlines of head of LA County Health Department arrested for, now that didn't happen. He was not even he quit the health department in 44. What else happened in 1944? Well, Steve's folks split up. George and Dorothy number two separated. What? You mean they weren't living at the Stoughton house and everything wasn't swimming? No. How do I know that? It's in the newspapers and in her, thank you to Boxy, Frank Jimison from the district attorney's office interviewed Dorothy Hodel. And she said, yeah, we split up in 44 and the final decree was in 45, which again, that all predates when Steve says they moved into the Stoughton house. So that's kind of what where they are going. We know where they were living somewhat because Dorothy Hodel was a drunk. Steve's mom was a drunk, and she kept getting arrested for child neglect. The first time I think was in like 1944, late 1944, when Steve is 3, and then she's arrested multiple times. They put her on probation, all that kind of thing. And finally, they send her to jail for neglecting Steve and his brothers. And so we have the address in the newspaper articles of where they were living. And in 1948, I will point out, if you get the letter, her letters to John Huston are in the Motion Picture Academy Library if you want to see them. In April of 48, she writes to John Huston, who is now a big-time director, and says, hey, things are bad, things are terrible. we need money. And John Huston generally came across with some money, but they are, in case you're taking notes, they were living not at the Soudan House, but at 2313 Bushrod Lane. And in 1950, she's living on Santa Monica Pier. Okay. So none of that's true about this, living at the Soudan House and everything is wonderful. Now, let's introduce Tamar. Okay. This will be interesting. Tamar is born in 35, and from a fairly early age, Tamar demonstrated a problem with being truthful. She demonstrated an ability to make up stories. Okay. At the age of roughly 7, something like that, her mom sent her off to a doctor for a psychological evaluation. The doctor says she's a pathological liar. So when Steve claims that, oh, well, in trial she was labeled as a pathological liar, she had been diagnosed as a pathological liar many years earlier. Okay. Her grandmother testifies that Tamar is a chronic liar. Her reputation for truth and veracity isn't good. And Tamar's grandmother got off her sickbed to testify to that. As Tamar gets a little older, I mean, what we're going to see is Tamar Hodel emerges pretty quickly as an incorrigible teenage girl. Okay, what do incorrigible teenage girls do? Well, she makes up stories. She has been going out in the country with boys since she was 12. So to try to get a handle on Tamar, the mom, Dorothy number 1, sends Tamar off to a convent to straighten her out. Well, that doesn't work. So Dorothy number 1 says, she gets married in 47. She says, Tamar is so prone to making up stories about men and sex that I actually have to babysit whenever she is around my husband so that she won't accuse him of molesting her. That is how prevalent her allegations are. She does it all the time. Finally, Dorothy number 1 of San Francisco has a heart attack. And at that point, she says, I have had it with you. I am sending you down to live with your dad in Los Angeles. Okay. What happens next? And there's this quote from Dr. Hodel: charges by Tamar are those of a vengeful, incorrigible child. Well, indeed, she was a vengeful, incorrigible child. How do we know that? Well, remember Duncan? Remember when I was talking about Duncan, George Hodel's oldest son? Before Tamar goes down to LA to live with George, she tells Duncan, hey, I don't want to go down there. I'm going to make up a story that dad molested me. And the cops won't know. It won't be true, but the cops won't know that. And they'll arrest him and get him in trouble. And so she deliberately did that. Now, she didn't just say that in front of Duncan. She also said that in front of one of his buddies. And so they will show up in the trial saying, yep, Tamar said she was going to make up the story to get dad in trouble. So that is kind of where that is kind of the prelude to what happened next. Duncan also testified that Tamar told him she was pregnant and wanted an abortion, and hold on to your hats, folks, Dr. Hodel wouldn't let her go through with it because he's death on abortions. Father wants me to be saddled with a damn brat the rest of my life, and I'm only 14. So yeah. George Hodel not only didn't run an abortion ring, but he was opposed to abortion. So yeah, it is a very, very different story than you get out of Steve Hodel. And in case you wonder, everything I'm saying is in some document. Okay, it's either in a news report or in Boxy or some other physical thing that I can say, hey, where did this come from? And I'll tell you. Okay. Let's see. Okay. We have now set the stage for what happens next. Dorothy number 1 Uh, that's a great question on Instagram. Let me hold that thought. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so it is June 1946, Father's Day, as it so happens. Dorothy number one has shipped Tamar down to live with George. Tamar doesn't want to go to Hollywood. She doesn't want to go to LA. George is living at this point, not, he's not king of the Southern house. And he's living the life of the swinging single. He does not want his incorrigible teenage daughter, who is, let's face it, she's a bombshell. She's good looking. When you see Steve's pictures of Tamar, she is like, wow, okay. I can see where, Tamar would attract a lot of male interest. Okay. So, wow. Okay. Here we go. It is Father's Day in June of 1949. And I have to preface this by saying hypnotism in 1949 was seen as a legitimate tool for medical people and psychological people. It was that power of suggestion. We may look on it today as pseudoscience crapola, but in 1949, it was considered legit. Okay. So Tamar is out on a date. Let's see. Tamar's out on a date, and she comes back to the Southern house. This is her first day staying with Dad, and she's already been out on a date. And George is conducting a hypnotism session, and having bad judgment is not against the law. Doing stupid things is not against the law. If it were, the prisons would be even fuller than they are. Okay. George is doing a hypnotism session in the bedroom. I don't know why. He does. Who's there? Well, there is George, and there are two women named Barbara Sherman and Corinne Tarrant. Let's see if I can. I'm frantically paging through my notes here because, again, this is so complicated. All right. Anyway, George is doing the hypnotism session, and the way I recall it is, he's trying to hypnotize Barbara Sherman. There's two. It's one of the other women. I think it is. He's trying to hypnotize Barbara Sherman, and who else is there? Okay, sometime kind of girlfriend Barbara Sherman. This other lady, Corinne Tarrant. I'm not sure who the heck she is, but she figures into the story. And then Fred Sexton, the painter. Okay. So Barbara Sherman, George is presumably, look into my eyes, you are getting sleepy. He's trying to hypnotize Barbara Sherman. Put your arms out to your side. They are strong as bars of iron. Okay. He's doing that. And Corinne Tarrant is responding to all this hypnotism stuff. And so you've got that. Where is Fred Sexton in all of this? Well, Fred Sexton is on the bed, as one does when there's a hypnotism session going on. Okay. Tamar comes home from her date, and she enters the bedroom where they're doing hypnotism. Again, doing stupid things isn't against the law. What is about to happen, that's kind of illegal. What happens is this. Fred Sexton is on the bed. Tamar plops down on the bed next to Fred Sexton. Now, were there no other chairs? Was the floor not available? You have to wonder, okay, why does Tamar plop down on the bed next to Fred Sexton? But that's what happens. Corinne, pretty sure it's Corinne. It's one of the two women. I'm pretty sure it's Corinne. Decides, hey, I'm going to get a glass of sherry for Tamar, which is like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? But again, So there's the glass of sherry from Corinne, gives it to Tamar. Pretty soon, Tamar's got her top off, she's got her bra off, and she and Fred Sexton are making out. Now, during the course of the trial, it will be asked, why didn't you stop him? Well, I just couldn't stop myself. Okay. So this is the night in question. Okay. Remember, June 1949. Now, what happens? George finally wakes up from his, you are getting sleepy, you are getting sleepy, your arms are bars of iron. Well, he finally wakes up. He finally notices what's going on with Fred Sexton and Tamar on the bed. And he drags Fred Sexton off the bed and throws him out of the house. That's what really happens. And he tells Tamar, put your clothes on and go to your room. And that's what really happens, according to court testimony. That's all in court testimony. That is not what you get from Steve Hodel, but that is the testimony of what happened that night. Angry with Fred Sexton, grabs him off the bed, throws him out of the house, tells Tamar, go to your room. Okay, and that is in June of 1949. Well, the weeks and months roll on, and it's fall. Tamar is a teenager, and so she has to be enrolled in school. And so she is enrolled at Hollywood High School. This will be important later. So it's October, and Tamar, and I know this will be shocking if you have ever dealt with an incorrigible teenage girl, or you have ever been an incorrigible teenage girl. What do? They run away from home. It is standard. It is like the first page of the incorrigible teenage girl's playbook, along with sex and boys and other stuff. Yeah, she runs away from home, of course. And so George files an attempt to locate, because the cops won't even, runaway teenage girls are so common, the cops won't even take a report for 24 hours. So he files an attempt to locate, and they pick her up, and she tells this story about Jean Marie. I don't know how that works. So that she's picked up, and she tells her story. Now, this is very, very important for everything that follows. Tamar is a teenager. She's a juvenile. She's underage. Okay. And why is that important? Because the court system has a whole separate set of rules for adults and for juveniles. And because Tamar is a juvenile, she has to be handled differently, especially a juvenile girl. One great example of this is when Steve will say, well, Tamar learned that my dad was a suspect because the detective's transporting her. Well, baloney. That's not true. And Steve, being a cop, would know that. Adult men would not transport a juvenile female. It didn't happen. Okay. And in fact, when you go to the original newspaper accounts, you will see that there is a matron from the district attorney's office who was responsible for Tamar. Adult men didn't get anywhere near her. So again, that's oh, I get to block somebody. Goodbye. Bye. Let's see. Okay. First Hodel person. Okay. And that is why I have the chat on slow. Anyway, where was I? Okay. She's a juvenile. And so she can't stay with George, and she can't stay with her mother. And so Tamar is in a juvenile facility. She's in, let's see, El Retiro Rancho for Girls is where she is. And she will stay there. She will, in fact, be incommunicado from her mother for the duration of the trial. So that is kind of that. So we've got George arrested here. Okay, he was lodged in the Hollywood jail and was arraigned October 6th on charges of incest and perversion, according to the Daily News. Okay. This requires some really fast footwork from Steve Hodel because Steve wants to drag in Gene Spangler. Okay. And it's really hard to work out how George Hodel got out of jail and went off and killed. Okay. All righty. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. I think I took care of the Hodel individual this time. It's nice to get a Hodel person. That's sort of fun. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Let's see. Where was I here? Okay, so George is in. Okay. George is in jail, and Steve Hodel has to do fast footwork to get George out of jail in time so that he can kill Gene Spangler. He's really got to work fast. Okay. So what's going to happen next is this. These are the phases of what happens next. First of all, there's going to be an arraignment. Okay. That is just where the judge sets bail, decides whether an individual can be released or not, or sets bail or whatever. Okay. The next thing that happens is there will be a preliminary hearing. And what happens in the preliminary hearing is the prosecution, the police take their case to the district attorney. The district attorney says, yeah, I'm going to file on that. The preliminary hearing says, yeah, okay, we're going to file on this case. Here's the defendant. And it's all very, at that point, very, just the broadest possible outlines. And a trial date will be set at that point. Now, before the trial, the defense is going to make some typical defense motions. Human resource. The defense is going to make, and the defense always does that. The first thing George Hodel's defense does is they ask for a delay, because of course you do that if you're a defense attorney. First thing is, so the defense asks for, that's standard. I mean, the defense will do that. And the judge says, the defense says, yep, based on this other case involving a young girl, my client can't get a fair trial. Can we have a delay? The judge says, no. And that's all pretty standard. The other thing that is really interesting is that the defense requests the judge, hey, can we get a psychological evaluation of Tamar? And the judge goes, I don't know. That's a weird request. I've never gotten one of those before. And the prosecution goes, no, we don't want the defense doing a psychological evaluation of Tamar. We don't want that. But the judge says, okay, you can do one. Now remember, and this is important, Tamar's a juvenile. She's under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. And so the juvenile court judge says, no, Tamar is a juvenile. She's under my supervision, and there is no way you are going to do a psychological evaluation of her. No. Now, who are the attorneys here? Well, for the prosecution, you've got two guys. One of them is William Ritzie, who is a future judge. Okay. William Ritzie, highly respected in law enforcement, future judge. Okay. On the defense, you have not Jerry Giesler, as Steve Hodel always claims, but a guy in his office named Neeb. Again, if you are charged with a crime, it is your constitutional right to have an attorney. There is nothing wrong with that. And there is nothing wrong with having a good attorney. And if you are charged with molesting your kid, you damn sure want a good attorney. There's nothing wrong with that. There really isn't. And let me point out, because you will never, ever, ever hear it from Steve Hodel, is that the district attorney's office had just made juvenile incidents a priority. The district attorney had just successfully prosecuted an incest case. It was a case involving a tennis coach who was molesting his daughter. They won a conviction. The guy went to San Quentin. That's for real. And who would be interested in that case? Amazingly enough, Tamar Hodel was very interested in this incest case that occurred before the George Hodel trial. Okay. So there are other people who are also arrested. There's a doctor named Francis Ballard. He's accused of performing an abortion on Tamar, along with his handyman. I mean, and I left out when Tamar made her allegations about George molesting her. She also said that one of the other residents in the house, Joe Barrett, well, I had sex with Joe Barrett 35 times. And I was also molested by 13 boys at Hollywood High School. I mean, it was, and you will never, ever hear any of that from Steve. He will only say it was Dad. No, it was this buffet of suspects that supposedly Joe Barrett, all the boys at Hollywood High School, were having their way with Tamar. Okay, so at the arraignment, the judge sets bail for George Hodel $5,000. Okay, the doctor who supposedly performed the abortion, he is released on his own recognizance, no bail. And you have to ask yourself, gee, if George Hodel was so rich and so powerful, how come he had to stay in jail until he made bail? How come he was arrested at all if he is so wealthy and powerful and knows too much? How is that possible? So anyway, let's see. Okay. The structure, the phases of the trial are this. The first thing you're going to have is, okay, I'm zipping through. Okay, the first thing you're going to have in a trial is jury selection. That's the first thing that happens. That's in December 49. You've got jury selection. Okay. The next thing you're going to have is opening statements, opening arguments from the defense, the prosecution, and the defense. Then you're going to have witnesses. You're going to have the prosecution witnesses, and then the witnesses are going to be cross-examined by the other side. Normally you will have prosecution witnesses and you will have defense witnesses. Okay. And let me point out, it is really important. If you have never been on jury duty, you will not know this. Okay. What attorneys say in a trial is not evidence. Let me say that again. What attorneys say in a trial is not evidence. So when the defense attorney says, Tamar, did you say all this stuff about the Black Dahlia? And Steve Hodel is like, yeah, look at this. Okay, doesn't matter. What attorneys say in a trial isn't evidence. Then the other thing is the witness list. Okay, we're going to see who the witnesses are. And the attorneys will play games with each other. They will put people on the witness list that they have no intention of actually calling. They're not going to call this person, but we're going to say it to kind of affect the other side. There's all this gamesmanship of the witness list. And there are a lot of courtroom procedures and rules of evidence and all that stuff where if one attorney doesn't introduce a certain subject, the opposing attorney can't ask about it. And I won't get into all of that. It's really complicated. But believe me, the courtroom litigators all know that stuff. And let's see. So, yeah. I think and then finally you'll have the closing arguments by the prosecution and the defense, and the judge will give instructions to the jury. The jury will retreat to deliberations, and they'll pick a foreperson, and they will deliver a verdict. And they will come and they will signal the bailiff that we have a verdict. They'll go into court. They'll tell the judge what the verdict is, and boom, we're done. So that is the structure of what we're going to look at next. And I'm going to have to talk fast. Okay. Jury selection is first. It takes 4 days. The jury composition is important in this case because it's a sex charge. It's a sex case. Okay. The jury of 12 is 8 women, 4 men, and 1 woman alternate. Okay. And the trial is behind closed doors, which is interesting. We have opening arguments. Deputy District Attorney Ed McClarty makes his statement. He will contend that we're going to show that George Hodel let a friend be intimate with Tamar in the presence of Barbara Sherman and Corinne Tarrant at the Hodel home. This was followed by perversions performed by Miss Sherman and Hodel himself. Now, the defense is a guy named Robert Neeb, and he says we're going to call Tamar's mother, Dorothy Barbie of San Francisco, that Tamar has been classified as a pathological liar in matters to sex. Okay, so here come the witnesses. First witness is Tamar. Okay, and let me point out that the attorneys are very clever on who they have as witnesses and who they don't. At one point, a juror will say, "Is Barbara Sherman going to testify?" And it's like, no, she doesn't testify. One of the witnesses was Fred Sexton. And let me just point out, if I was accused in any way of being on a bed with a half-naked teenage girl, I sure as hell wouldn't testify. I would either take the fifth the whole way through. It's like, and it's not clear that he actually testified. There's no newspaper coverage of his testimony. It could be one of those things where one side or the other put him on the witness list just to kind of play psychological games with the other side. Attorneys do that. Okay, attorneys do that, and I highly recommend if you get called for jury duty, go. You'll get your $5 a day in a free parking spot, but just see how trials are actually conducted rather than what you see on TV. It's very informational. Okay. First witness, opening witness is Tamar Hodel. Sultry, according to the Daily News, it's sultry Tamar Hodel. And she testifies that there were these naked statues that they found in George Hodel's home. Well, they were in a closet somewhere. The defense objects to the nude statues. Ritzy says they're typical of many objects found in Hodel's home. Tamar said a wild sex party occurred. And this is an interesting quote. Tamar was not displeased to find herself the center of attention when she took to the stand to tell her sordid story in the court of Superior Judge Thomas L. Ambrose. She gestured dramatically and frequently during her recital to a jury of 8 women and 4 men of the events that took place, that she says took place. And it gets into what she wore and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. Tamar was given a water tumbler full of sherry wine, which she drank. So that's her testimony. That is Tamar's testimony. Now we have cross-examination by the defense. Neeb says, "You didn't resist Fred Sexton when he allegedly made love to her after performing a perverted act." Tamar said, "I seemed unable to resist." And Neeb asked, "Do you remember telling one of your dad's associates that I could murder him and probably will if someone else doesn't first?" Oh, no, she doesn't remember that. Now, again, what attorneys say isn't evidence. Only her response is evidence. Okay. So that ended the first day of the trial. Let's see. Oh, isn't it a fact that you told a rumor in your mother's home in San Francisco that you knew your father had killed the Black Dahlia and that he was insane and would kill everybody in the house? Okay, that's not evidence. She says, no, that's evidence. Isn't it a fact you said you were going to accuse George Hodel of immoral relationships with you? You made this statement in front of Duncan and his friend Edward Brandt. Okay. So day 2, more cross-examination of Tamar. He said, do you remember telling Joe Barrett, the house has secret passages. My father is a murderer of the Black Dahlia. My father's going to kill me and the rest of the members of the household because he has a lust for blood. He is insane. Again, what attorneys say in a trial is not evidence. The jury cannot consider that. Tamar says, I don't remember anything like that. That you can consider. I don't remember that. He couldn't get her to admit that she threatened to get even with her dad. Don't you remember telling Duncan? Don't you remember telling Duncan that I'm going to say on a certain night I had sex with my father? I know it isn't true, but the cops won't. Her response was an indignant no. Okay. That is the end. Tamar is thanked and excused at that point, and goes back to juvenile hall, presumably. And there's more, but that's enough. The next witness is juvenile officer M.H. Brimson, who testified about finding lewd statuary and pornographic literature at the Sowden house. Let's see. And then there's a recess. Next witness is Corinne Tarrant, who Tamar says was at the party. Corinne Tarrant testifies, oh, I might have been hypnotized on the night when this happened. I'd previously been hypnotized by Dr. Hodel. I was watching Dr. Hodel hypnotize Barbara Sherman. And Neeb asked, did it bring back to you recollection of your hypnotic experiences? And she said, yes. Do you feel you were affected by it? Yes. Yes. It seemed all a little unreal and fantastic, but I can't tell you if I was hypnotized or not. You felt it? She says, I still feel it. It is also a part of my daily life. And Tarrant also says, yeah, I saw Hodel commit this alleged act with Tamar. Okay. Corinne Tarrant, by the way, is curvaceous and 25. Let's see. Then, under cross-examination from Neeb, she kind of walks it back. She says, well, okay, I gave the impression that I was there. I left the bedroom at that point. I was very disturbed and decided to leave. So first of all, she said she was there. Then she says, well, I got disturbed and left. And then there was a question, did you help undress Tamar? Apparently Tamar, said that somebody helped her get undressed. And Tarrant says, I did not assist her in any way in taking her clothes off. Okay. Because remember, Tamar had her blouse and her bra off and was making out with Fred Sexton, allegedly. Okay. Now, Tarrant, this testifying, said that almost at the beginning of the interlude, Tamar leaned over and proceeded to kiss Fred Sexton quite passionately. Oh, really? So it wasn't Fred Sexton that initiated this. It was Tamar, who comes in from her date, has a glass of sherry, plops down on the bed with Fred Sexton, and starts making out with him. How very interesting. Why don't we get that story from Steve Hodel? Why doesn't he tell you any of that? Now, Corinne Tarrant says, yeah, Dr. Hodel pulled the man off the bed. They exchanged angry words, and he ordered Fred Sexton from the room. Okay. That is what happened. Next witness, Tamar's mom, Dorothy number 1. She is remarried. She's a bookstore clerk in the Bay Area. Neeb, the defense attorney, questioned Barb about Tamar's reputation for truthfulness. Dorothy number 1 admitted with a shake of her head she would not believe the girl under oath. Barb added that the girl for many years has made charges that men have molested her and made improper advances, and that in all these cases, her statements were proven false. Okay. Under cross-examination from Ritzy. Okay. Dorothy number one is a defense witness. Now it's Ritzy's turn, the prosecution's turn, to cross-examine her. Under cross-examination, she tells Ritzy, I haven't been able to see Tamar at juvenile hall. It's almost Christmas. I'm not allowed to write to her. It's almost Christmas. I have these Christmas presents for her, and they won't let me give her her Christmas presents. Okay. And so Ritzy says, you know what? I'll tell you what. I will take your Christmas presents from her. I will see that Tamar gets them. Ritzy asks, isn't it true that you and Tamar have never been close? And Dorothy starts crying and says, that's not true. I believe that if you talk to Tamar, you would find it not true at all. And then she talks about the Christmas package. So Ritzy says, leave the package at my office, and I will see that Tamar gets it. So let's see. The next day, Dorothy testifies again. The mom says, Ritzy asks her on cross-examination, would you believe Tamar under oath? The mother says, I would like to, but I'm afraid I can't. Barb says that Tamar made an accusation against her husband, but that Barb knew that the mom knew it was untrue. Knowing the girl's nature, Dorothy says, she and her husband made it a practice never to leave him alone with Tamar in order to remove any grounds for accusation. Barb denies that she was not very close to her daughter. And I think, we have more witnesses for the defense. We have Mrs. Louise McKinder. We have Mrs. Jean McCarthy. We have Barbara Warren. These ladies have known Tamar from 3 years all the way up to 14 years. And they all say she's a liar. All of them say she's a liar. I wouldn't believe her, even under oath. Mrs. McKinder said, would you believe her? Not if it suited her purpose to lie or pertained in any way to sex. That's what they say about Tamar. All of which leads up to George gets on the stand. Okay. He says he was demonstrating hypnotism. Fred Sexton was there. Barbara Sherman was there. Corrine Tarrant was there. He said he wanted to hypnotize Barbara Sherman to extend her arms as if they were bars of steel. He noticed that Tarrant also had her arm extended. He further noticed that Fred Sexton and Tamar Hodel were sprawled on the bed. George testified. Tamar and Fred were embracing on the bed. Tamar had her brassiere and blouse off. Fred was fully clothed. Dr. Hodel said he pulled Sexton from the bed, ordered him from the room, and asked Tarrant to go. He said, I didn't want to speak to Tamar in front of them. He subsequently ordered Tamar to his room. Michael, that's a Black Dahlia question. I will get to that next time. And the short answer is no. And then he gets into all of the backstory of Tamar, why he came there, all that sort of thing. Let's see. There was testimony regarding Tamar's interest in this incest trial that had just preceded her allegations against her dad. It was in September 1949, the tennis coach, and I won't say anything beyond that. I'm not sure if the victim in that is still alive, but I'm not going to say anything more about it. Okay, and then Duncan testifies. Duncan, George Hodel's son number one, said, yeah, Tamar told me she was pregnant, but Dr. Hodel wouldn't let her get an abortion. Father wants me to be saddled with a damn brat the rest of my life, and me only 14. Does that sound like a lady who, in a few years, handed off a baby to a washroom attendant in Nevada? Yeah, I think it does. I think that's how no one should be surprised that Tamar handed off Fauna number one to a washroom attendant. She didn't want to be saddled with a brat. Okay. The housekeeper tells the same story. One of Duncan's friends says, yeah, same thing. I don't want to be stuck with a squalling brat. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up faster. Closing arguments. The defense, um, the defense says the only reason George Hodel is on trial is because his 14-year-old daughter is a psychopathic liar. He says Tamar should have never been allowed to testify. She should have never been brought into the courtroom in a blaze of publicity to tell her lies as the center of attention. She should be in a hospital under treatment as a psychopath. If you convict the doctor on her testimony, she'll never be rehabilitated because she can go through her life lying and lying. Boy, I'll tell you, that's the motto of the Tamar Hodel branch. Go through life lying and lying. And Neeb recalls all the defense witnesses who said Tamar is a liar, which was uniform. Okay. The case goes to the jury. The judge gives instructions to the jury, and the jury is sequestered. They are put up. They don't get a verdict immediately, so they sequester the jury in a downtown LA hotel. Tamar is in juvenile hall, and in 4 hours, and you know, Christmas is moments away at this point. Christmas is coming up fast, and so the jury is sequestered. They have a verdict in like 4 hours, less than 4 hours deliberation, not guilty. And remember, the jury consists of how many? Most accounts say 8 women and 4 men. Some accounts say 9 women and 3 men. One of the women being an alternate, but it's either 8 and 4 or 9 and 3. So Tamar, poor wounded Tamar, failed to convince all these women on the jury. Okay. What is the fall? George Hodel is sprung. He's found not guilty. Fine. Barbara Sherman pleads guilty to contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Dr. Ballard, the guy who was accused of doing the abortion on Tamar, dismissed, no evidence. He's just cut loose. Nothing happened. Barbara Sherman gets probation for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Let's see. And I'm not sure what happened to Taryn. That might be it. That might be all. So George Hodel is found not guilty within 4 hours. And that is pretty much Tamar Hodel is a warden. Tamar Nace Anthony Hodel is a ward of the court. She's a juvenile. And so she can't go live with her dad. She doesn't want to go live with her mom. And so she then becomes a ward of the court. I think eventually she goes up and lives with her mom in the Bay Area. I think that's what happened. Because when, I think it's fauna number 1. When fauna number 1 is born, Tamar's living with the mom, I think, at that point. But that's a story for another day. So that is the trial of George Hodel as much as I can remember it. And I got a question over here on Instagram that's interesting. I think I can take care of it fast. Did George really work at the LA Record? Were you able to find any articles that he wrote? No, absolutely none, zero. There's absolutely nothing to show that George Hodel ever worked for the LA Record. Steve likes to quote this story about, it's actually a sidebar. It's a sidebar to the main story about, I think it's this woman. It's a woman who died, and they found I think it's the Ace of Diamonds next to the body. And there's this sort of, sidebar column, writerly writing thing. There's no byline on that. There's nothing to show that George Hodel ever wrote for the LA Daily Record, other than Steve wanting it to be true. And there's no byline on it. So that is that. Let's see. I got 1 minute left. Let's see. Michael, your question is that's an Elizabeth Short question. Tried to implicate us. Yeah, you know what? Steve Hodel, as far as Steve Hodel is concerned, George Hodel committed every famous crime ever committed. every one of them. I can't keep track of everything that he claims. It's just massive. The guy has been pushing this thing for 20 years. Okay. Let's see. Is there other? George Hodel was a convenient scapegoat in a whispering campaign conducted by the police who couldn't solve the case. No. George Hodel was investigated and eliminated, and everybody was done with George Hodel until Steve Hodel dredged it up to sell books and get interviews. George Hodel was forgotten. He was a footnote in the Black Dahlia case until Steve Hodel came along and decided to make some coin on Dad, and that's all it is. Let's see. Did Tamar ever recant anything? I didn't. I only got a few emails from Tamar, and that was not a relationship I wanted to pursue, because you don't know, is this Tamar or is it somebody claiming to be Tamar? I mean, she ended one with, "This is Tamar Hodel," and it's like, stay away. It's the one person that, it's like, I did hear from Tamar or someone claiming to be Tamar, but it's like, I don't know. Tamar was all over the place. The people who know her much better than I do, they haven't anything good to say about her at all. I mean, absolutely nothing. Let's see. Was George Hodel really a piano prodigy? No, he was not. Georgie played the piano at a day of speeches. He was an little musical interlude. Little Georgie came in, tinkled the ivories during a day of speeches at Shrine Auditorium. This barn that seats thousands of people, and the idea of doing a piano recital there is just, if you know anything about music or acoustics, it's like hilarious. It's like, no, that's absolutely impossible. So no, it's more Steve Hodel fiction. George, he took piano lessons. Maybe he was kind of good. Okay, let's see. Andre, this is a good place to wrap up. Rasha and Yvette. Oh, thank you for asking about Rasha and Yvette. Okay, this is the Tamar Hodel family tree. And I was told that I've been calling her Tamar. I'm told it's Tamar. Fine. This is the family tree. You've got Tamar. You've got fauna number 1, because there's also fauna number 2. And I've got an email from fauna number 2, and she's even scarier than Tamar. It's like, I don't want email from either one of these people. I just don't want it. And so it's Tamar, fauna number 1. And then you've got Yvette, is from fauna's first marriage relationship. And Rasha is from marriage number 2 or second relationship. All of them, all of them just came along and they say, "Hey, Uncle Steve is making some coin on this book. Let's get on the gravy train." And so they did. Yeah. And that's all it is. Let's make some coin off of conveniently dead George Hodel. And that is really all there is to it. The claims that, we always knew. Nah. It's lying about George Hodel is the family business. And you know what? We've gone an hour. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for showing up. Let's see. Instagram folks. Let's see. Okay. This is a good place to close for the day. I will do another one of these. I will do a Black Dahlia Ask Me Anything on the first Tuesday in November, which let me find my calendar here. First Tuesday in November is the 7th, which is Election Day. Okay, that will be the Black Dahlia Ask Me Anything. The George Hodel Ask Me Anything will be, I'll go back to the 3rd week of the month, which is November 21st. Okay, both of those. Black Dahlia, November 7th, 10 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube and Instagram. And then the George Hodel Ask Me Anything, 3rd Tuesday of the month, which is the 21st, also 10 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube and Instagram. Again, thanks everybody for coming. It was interesting to get a Steve Hodel person, or at least a crackpot. Now I know how to block people. So I did learn that. Okay. Talk to you later. Okay. Adios. Oh, and I should say, this will be posted online as soon as I end the stream. It'll go, it will, YouTube will work its magic on it, and it will be available, and it'll take a while, but then the chat will be available as well. So if you have questions, put them in the comments, and I'll see them later. Okay. All right. Until then, and remember, right, Boxy, don't dress up like Elizabeth Short for Halloween. Don't do it. Last reminder, don't do it. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay.